G'day, mate. I caught your video, and some of it I agree with, and others I don't. As far as biblical references go to authority of women and so forth. But you and I can disagree with that as reasonable adults, both being Christian and so forth. I'm not trying to be sidestepping there. I'm just saying we can disagree with that scenario that you've brought up. You know, of course, that leftists are going to not agree with that. The women are going to say, "Oh, you want to be controlling women." No, what they don't realise what that means is that the under biblical reference, the male is the head of the spiritual head of the family. They don't realise that because they're not of the spirit. They don't know this. So you and I understand it. But let me continue on this other areas about Julia Gillard and her Labor government. You know, mate, when you and I were brought up, and the majority of Australians were as well, we were told that lying was disgraceful. We were told that it was a sin, that it was wrong, and we were told all this, and anyone that lied was never to be trusted. But suddenly, lying has become the new truth. Now, I'm referring to this with Julia Gillard and the introduction of the carbon tax. Prior to the election in 2010, the Labor Party had no policy about introducing a carbon tax. The Liberal Party didn't, the Labor Party didn't. So we are to believe that these three political parties, the majority of these parties, had no carbon tax. Now, the election, as you know, was a close drawn thing, and it looked like a minority government was to be instilled, or installed, I should say. And Gillard went and did a deal with the Greens, and 3 or 4 weeks later, after actually winning the election, so to speak, suddenly we discovered that, oh yes, indeed, we have a carbon tax. And Julia Gillard claimed, oh, but we were going to introduce a carbon tax anyway. Despite misleading her own party and those who voted for her, despite actually lying to the Australian people, lying in a federal election, and then to gain office, she has to have a coalition, so to speak, with the Greens, and one of the conditions of the Greens was the introduction of a carbon tax. Less than 13% of those who voted in the last federal election in 2010 have dictated to us, the majority, and that includes Liberals, Nationals, and Labor Party supporters, that we have to have a carbon tax now. So Julia Gillard actually lied. Quote, no government I lead will have a carbon tax. After the so-called win to become Prime Minister and doing the deal with the Greens, she backflips. She strikes up this coalition with the Greens, and then we have a carbon tax. This is a lie, based upon a lie. And you and I both know that lying, and the majority of Australians know that lying is unacceptable. Now, none of us are that naive to believe that politicians don't lie. We know this to be one of those truth areas. But to blatantly lie and then accept it accepted as the new truth, according to Julia Gillard. Nah, that is wrong. Lying is a sin. It is wrong, and if she expects us to believe her, her credibility was shot after that. Now, if you criticise this government in any particular form or fashion, they have a whole series of nice little labels to place on you. For example, Tony Abbott is being called a misogynist. If you don't favour the government's handling of illegal immigration, you're called a racist. If you don't favour the government's area of dealing with Islamic fundamentalists and terrorism, you're again called a racist or you're called intolerant. And this government has all these nice little labels that hang on people. Not only just Tony Abbott, but also every Australian individual who disagrees with this government. Because many of her supporters viewing this video right now would call me a racist, they would call me a misogynist, they would call me all sorts of charming names because I'm expressing my freedom of speech and thought. And they don't like that. Funny about that. That's how it works in this country, freedom of speech. And this government is using gender as one of those cards now to deflect criticism of it. And all these little toadies come along, YouTube or the mainstream media or different areas on the internet like Facebook, Twitter, so forth. If you disagree with these people, you're labelled all these charming little names. They don't realise that freedom of speech is there for everyone, not just them. And if they don't like freedom of speech, then I'm sorry, they're in the wrong society or country, whatever the case may be, under a constitutional monarchy in this country. Freedom of speech is enshrined. That we enshrine freedom of speech. It is not from government. It is from God. God gives us that area to think for ourselves and also to speak for ourselves. There's a fundamental right, and they just missed the point completely, and it's God-given, and it's not from government. Look at example, the US Constitution. One of those documents that enshrines freedom of speech and declares as such. Even our own Australian Constitution, even our own ideas of government, that the people have freedom of speech. It's God-given. You don't earn it. You don't take it along the silver platter and they give it out at some little fete down the road where you can buy it for tuppence. You have freedom of speech and it was paid for in blood, but it's also God-given. And this government is trampling over the wishes of the people, trying to deny us our freedom of speech, and all these little toadies for the Labor's Party supporters all lockstep in line, and they swear and abuse you and all this sort of stuff just to try and shut you up. It is not happening. And this debate in Parliament with Julia Gillard calling Tony Abbott a misogynist. Now it's gender. is being used to protect or deflect criticism from this government by Julia Gillard, um, Roxon, uh, Wong, and a myriad of other female Labor politicians. But, and each and every one of them is a member of Emily's list that believes in abortion on demand. Suddenly children don't have a right to exist now. Talk about that another time. Mate, but I agree with what you had to say. Mostly. But we can agree to disagree because we are individuals. We are people who actually do think, despite what these Labor Party supporters say. I noticed one of the comments was, you're misguided because you believe in a sky god and all this sort of stuff. What would you know of the real world? Well, unfortunately, we do know what's of the real world, and we don't like it. And we will talk against it, and we will have our say against it, whether they like it or not. Mate, anyway, God be with you, and power to you, brother. Nice talking to you. Nice having a yarn. You and I can disagree, or we can agree. Because that's the area we live in this country that gives us the right to agree or disagree, and that includes government. Let's look at that US Constitution again, the First Amendment. The people have the right, or a person has the right to disagree with the government. And it's God-given. It's not given by government, it's God-given. And these people say to us, oh, well, God's a sky god, there's a fairies, blah, blah, blah. They can say what they like. That's their freedom of speech. I don't find offence at it. I just find it remarkable that they don't recognise it. But that's their choice. I'm not going to sit here and argue with them on that. But I will argue with them and debate them when they try and stample and stifle my freedom of speech and my freedom of thought. Anyway, mate, catch you later. Bye now.